Why, hello there. Welcome back. I'm Jess if you're new here. And today I'm going to tell you the beautiful story of how I turned this old desk that was just given away to me by one of my followers into this beautiful, classy desk behind me. It is one of my all-time favorite furniture makeovers, so much so that I decided to keep this for myself, and it's going to live in my guest room indefinitely, as long as we both shall live. Or just until I decide to change the design in here eventually. So without further ado, let's get started. And I know you've just seen a very quick before and after preview, but experts say I'm supposed to kindly ask you to subscribe to my channel in the first 30 seconds to 60 seconds of the video, so that's what I'm doing. If you could just take a minute, hit that subscribe button, it would help me so much. Okay, thanks. Now let's get into it. Have you ever stumbled upon a desk that's seen better days? Today we're going to be breathing new life into this vintage piece by transforming it into a timeless blend of taupe and natural wood tones. We started with definitely not original knobs, sticky drawers, and many, many layers of paint, which reveals someone's attempt to probably give this new life several times. First thing to go are these acrylic faux crystal knobs, and then I tape the inside of all of the hardware holes just so nothing seeps into the interiors of the drawer as we move into the refinishing process. Next, we're going to be stripping away years of old paint using Green Easy Furniture Stripper. I apply a thick layer with a chip brush and then wrap with plastic wrap. The plastic wrap helps keep it moist and activated on the surface. I especially like the thicker consistency of this furniture stripper, particularly for vertical surfaces because it's less prone to dripping, but applying the plastic wrap afterwards is just extra reassurance that your product stays adhered to the surface of your furniture. I applied the stripper to all the painted areas that I wanted to strip, so essentially the entire piece. And then we wait. About 45 minutes later, I unveiled the top and you can already see it's coming off.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
All of those years and layers of old paint literally melting off. I'm just using a plastic putty knife to, I can't even really say scrape, or like push off all the thick layers of paint. And can we just take a moment and appreciate how dang satisfying this is? And look at that wood grain underneath. I was so excited at this part, knowing that I could probably at least restore the top because that wood is just in such good condition and so pretty. Then I went on to stripping all the other surfaces of this desk, starting with the drawers. Unfortunately, the drawers weren't quite as easy. They gave me a slightly harder time. So these areas here that didn't come off with the first pass, I'm just gonna go over with a second round of Green Easy. Same process, applying it in a thick layer with a chip brush, and then covering it with some saran wrap. And I'm just gonna let it sit for another 45 minutes while I move on to the rest of this piece. And if you feel like you have this process of stripping and the technique down by now, feel free to jump forward to the next chapter of the video where we get more into the detail stripping. But I will warn you, before you fast forward, spoiler alert, the next few minutes are incredibly satisfying. There is a reason that I didn't cut out all of this footage. Once all the flat surfaces for the most part were stripped down, it's now time to move on to the detailed areas. These can be a little bit more of a pain, a little more challenging, but the Green Easy made for some pretty easy work, honestly. I'm just using some metal picks here to remove the old paint from all those detailed grooves. Another good tool to have on hand for this part would be like a wire brush, just to get into all of those little carved out details. As I started working on the seam where the top of the desk meets the sides, I decided it would just be easier to remove the top altogether. One, to get the edges super cleanly stripped, and two, to also make it easier when it came to sanding and staining and painting. If you look to the underside of the top, inside the top drawer pockets of most furniture, you'll find some sunken screws. I just removed those and then was able to remove the top. I had to fight with a little bit of adhesive and splintered a few spots, but that's okay. This is just the underside of the top that no one will ever see. And you can see I saved that little apron detail just because I knew it was going to be tricky, but now that the top is off, I was able to strip that area so much more easily. While my stripper is doing the heavy lifting on the apron details, I went on to the finishing step of the stripping process. Here I'm using the Green Easy Clean and Strip. It's a slightly different product, much thinner consistency. You mix it with a little bit of water, spray it on, and then scrub the surface with fine steel wool to remove any last little paint particles left behind by the first process of stripping, and gets rid of all of that thicker residual stripping agent. And I have to apologize, I did go back and strip the apron detail, but I didn't film it. So moving on to repairs. During that cleaning process, I did find a few spots of loose veneer here on the underside, so I loaded up a syringe with some wood glue and injected the glue between the body of the desk and the loose veneer, and then used probably an excessive number of clamps to tightly pull those two pieces together, and I let it dry for 24 hours. I repeated that same process on the other side. Now that the desk is all stripped and repaired, I'm going to move on to the sanding step. Using my Surf Prep sander, I'm going in with 220 grit. Typically, I might start with something slightly lower if I had an old finish to remove, but the stripping step took care of most of that for us. Plus, this is a veneered piece, and I really don't want to risk sanding through the veneer on accident, which is way more likely to happen if you're using a lower grit sandpaper. I slowly worked my way around over every surface of the desk until all of the old finish was completely removed and all the surfaces were nice and smooth. I'll be honest, when I'm moving through these processes of refinishing, especially if it's not a custom piece that I'm working on, I oftentimes have no idea what the design plan is going to be. I kind of just let the piece speak to me, and if there are areas that the wood grain is really beautiful, then I try to preserve those and refinish those, keeping them a nice natural wood. But if there are other areas with like veneer damage or the wood grain isn't so pretty, then I reach for my paint. But there's really no set plan typically when I go into these projects. And it's kind of nice that way. It gives you some freedom to work with the piece and not against it. And I'm just working my way through this piece, sanding every surface, yes, even the sides of the drawers that may have been overlooked in the chemical stripping step. I want every surface clean and smooth before moving on to the next step. Sanding can be one of the most time-consuming steps of refinishing, but it is definitely a must. It's not uncommon to find a few more repairs as you work through the sanding process. Here on the underside, I spotted a small area of veneer damage, and for this repair, I'm reaching for my quick wood. This is a great moldable product, great for areas like this that need a little bit of shape to them. You just cut off a small amount, mix it with your fingers until the different colors aren't marbly anymore, and then mold it onto your surface. I really like this material as well for filling hardware holes. It's a little less messy than Bondo and gives you a little bit more control over how much surface you're covering and allows you to shape those areas better. Once it was dry and hardened in about 20 minutes, I went in with a 120 grit sandpaper and sanded it down smooth, just trying to match the original shape of that spot. So now that the piece is completely stripped and sanded, I'm going to give it a good wipe down. I love a 50-50 mixture of water and denatured alcohol for this. It removes any residual sanding dust or stripping agent, and the alcohol component of it helps it dry super fast so we can get onto priming quicker. Once dry, I'm going to tape off any details that I'm really liking in that natural wood color. Again, I'm not always sure what I'm going to end up painting, but I'm gonna at least see what it looks like, keeping this front apron detail the natural wood color. After all the natural details are taped off, I grabbed my favorite stain blocking primer, Kills Restoration. I love this stuff, one, because it really does block tannins, which is crucial, especially if I end up painting a light color. And two, it performs like a shellac, but cleans up like a water-based product. I'm going to be rolling this on, so I'm just covering my little paint tray with aluminum foil for easy cleanup later. I'm starting by priming all of the drawers and essentially anywhere that I didn't tape off, meaning anywhere that I wasn't really happy with how that natural wood grain looked underneath. The areas that I am liking were the top and that apron front, which I will plan to leave natural for now. One thing I really like about this roller that I'm using is how fluffy it is. So it rolls paint on really nicely, but for the edges, you can also run it along the edge like I am here, and it lays paint down kind of like a brush, which is really handy. I'll link the exact roller in the description below. For the detailed areas over the front, I'm going in with a paintbrush and detail brush to cover anywhere the roller didn't quite get. Since these are inset drawers, meaning the drawer front is flush with the face frame, a little bit of the inner drawer pockets may peek through once I put the drawers back in place. So I taped off straight lines within the drawer pockets, and I'm going to be priming and painting those areas as well. Once all my primer was dry, it's time for sanding. I'm using a 220 grit foam pad for this step, and I just lightly sand every surface that received primer. Sanding between each layer of primer or paint is how you achieve a super smooth finish, even when not using a sprayer. And now we're gonna move on to the fun step of painting. Not pictured here, I wiped the piece down with 50/50 water denatured alcohol combo before moving on to this next painting step. When hand painting, I really like to lay down a little bit of water with my mister bottle to give myself almost like a skim coat. It acts to thin the paint a little bit and helps the paint lay down really nice and smooth. It also gives you a little bit more work time with the paint so it doesn't start pulling or getting streaky. I have a whole blog post about how to achieve a smooth finish with a brush, but the basics are 1. Thin the paint or spray before painting. 2. Cover the surface somewhat quickly, then mist again and go back over with long, sweeping, light brush strokes. And 3. Sand between coats. And 4. Use a really high quality brush. I really like this oval brush, and I'll link this exact one in the description below. I I decided to go with the color Sculptor Clay by Behr. I have so much leftover paint from our house. I've used this all over our house and it's one of my favorite like neutral taupe colors, and I'm using it in the line of Benjamin Moore Advanced, which is a really nice enamel based paint that will not require a top coat. And here's a good example of those steps. Mist, cover the entire surface. At this point, it does not have to be perfect, and then go back with long, sweeping, very light brush strokes. I repeated this step for every drawer and surface of the body. Hand painting can be kind of therapeutic, honestly. Just put on some favorite music, an audiobook, or a podcast, and time will go faster than you might think. Sure, I love spraying because it's so efficient, but I usually feel more connected to a piece when I hand paint it. For the detail areas over the front, I'm just using a detail brush to clean up some of the lines around where the tape didn't quite seal it in perfectly. And using that same detail brush to paint the inner lip of the drawer pockets. Once my first coat was dry, you can see the coverage is not perfect and you can see some brush marks. So I'm going back through with my 220 grit foam pad to smooth those out before my next coat. And I don't know why I keep forgetting to include this part, but after sanding, I wipe down with 50-50 water denatured alcohol combo before moving on to my second coat. And I'm using the same technique, a light mist, laying down the paint, and then going back with long strokes. The second coat is where you will really start to see some beautiful coverage. I won't bore you with painting the entire piece in the second coat, so we'll move on to working on the top. I was pleasantly surprised to find that it was in really good shape, so I'm planning to keep it natural. Before staining though, I'm just going through with my light to make sure there are no swirl marks left from my sander. I'll be using my favorite gel stain in the color Antique Walnut, and you can either use a wood conditioner or just plain old mineral spirits. Probably not quite this much as needed, but you want to at least use one of the two as a pre-stain treatment. Yeah, I used way too much here. It should not be sopping wet. Just a thin coat to cover the surface would have been sufficient. I'm applying the stain using a round sponge, and since this is a relatively small surface, I'm just going to cover the entire top of the desk before going back and wiping off the excess. If I was working on a larger surface though, I might want to work in smaller sections. And after letting the stain sit for a few minutes, I'm going back with a clean shop rag and wiping off the excess. For the side edges, I wanted a little more control for covering these surfaces, so instead of using the large blue sponge, I'm using a detailed brush to apply the stain to these spots. For the front details that I previously taped off, I actually decided to paint this lower portion. I didn't love how the wood underneath was discolored, and I was worried how it might take up stain. As for the top apron details with the rosette and fluted edges, I ended up not applying any stain to them. They had already matched the top so nicely, I just left them purely natural. And speaking of the top, it took my stain pretty nicely, except for some spots on the edge which looked like they probably got wood fill repaired in a previous lifetime. So these didn't take up the stain, nor would I expect them to. Instead, I did a little bit of spot treatment with these varathane markers, which worked like a charm. Once my spot touch-ups were completed, it's time to prep the top for top coat. I do this by lightly sanding with a high grit sandpaper, such as a 320 grit or higher, and then wipe away the dust using a tack cloth. Next, I loaded up my HomeRite sprayer with my preferred water-based top coat and sprayed 3 coats. Why 3? It's simply what the manufacturer recommends for ultimate durability. As my top coat was drying between coats, I moved on to hardware. I purchased these poles off of Amazon and they definitely look kind of cheap and plastic. So to dress them up and age them a little bit, I'm using a little bit of Rub and Buff in the colors Antique Gold and Autumn Gold to give it a little more depth and try to make them look more natural and aged. I started by just applying the Rub and Buff with my finger, but then I found these little round brushes applied the Rub and Buff really nicely and made for a little quicker work. And now it's time to attach the hardware, which is a little nerve-wracking. You can certainly purchase and use a jig, but I haven't purchased one yet, maybe out of stubbornness or frugality, I'm not really sure. But these in particular were pretty easy to install compared to others because you can just mark the drill hole through the hardware, and it looks like this top drawer, which I opted to keep natural and stained to match the top, had original hardware the exact same size as the ones I purchased. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I decided to paint this little apron front. I just primed it earlier and am just getting around to applying the paint now, but I think it just looks a little bit more cohesive, but leaving that top drawer, the natural stained color, I think gives it just the contrast that it needs. I originally had planned to leave this little detail below the drawers on each side natural too, but it was just a little bit too much going on in my mind, so I decided to prime and paint those as well. Once the top was completely dry from the top coat and the body of the dresser is all painted, I'm finally going to attach the top. I'm just using a little bit of wood glue over the areas of the body of the desk that will support the top. I then placed the top piece on the body and made sure to align its center. And over the back of a lot of vintage furniture pieces, you'll find these little squiggly metal strips. I just learned they're actually called corrugated fasteners, and I just very gently tapped and hammered those into place, which will help secure the top to the body. Next, we'll go back through the top drawer pockets and screw back in the screws that we removed previously when we removed the top before we stained it. And I kept those screws handy in a little mason jar for this exact reason. And before the final reveal, here is a quick reminder of where we started. A free piece of furniture from one of my followers turned into this classic beauty. And I just have to say, I am extra proud of this piece. It's always more work when you opt to refinish a piece that's previously painted, especially when it's painted in like multiple layers of paint, because that stripping process is not for the faint of heart. And even more work when you decide to keep part of the top or drawers natural, because that extra sanding is time consuming and it's way easier to just scuff sand and paint the whole thing. Sometimes that stain doesn't take up quite like you want it to. It can be a little less predictable than paint, but I think all the work was totally worth it. What do you think? I really do try to be mindful when I paint particularly old pieces to honor the charm and the original character. And I really love the contrast that the upper drawer and the top provide against the classic taupe color. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give me a little thumbs up down below and be sure to subscribe for future videos like this. And I'll see you next time.